Good afternoon to everyone out there, our people from Global Exchange and the rest of the community. Thank you for joining this presentation on the humanitarian crisis in Peru by Global Exchange and 360 Press. We are very fortunate today to have with us a couple of great guests to talk about the humanitarian crisis in Peru. You just saw horrifying scenes in the people being killed in large numbers in protests in Peru. Um, but if you're like me and most Americans, you don't know a lot about Peru. We've heard things over the last years. People have the images of, the mountains, the beautifully dressed indigenous people. A lot of Americans have gone to Machu Picchu. We've heard about mass protests in Peru. And over the years, the decades, we've heard about the Shining Path, Fujimori, instability, the kind of political instability that has led to mass protests and 6 presidents, 2 coups, and 1 president impeached, 2 presidential resignations, all in the last 6 years. So today we welcome Florence Gulpil, who is a documentary photographer who works with National Geographic magazine. She's on the ground in Peru, in Lima, and we'll get right back to you. We also have with us Paulo Sosa from the Institute for Peruvian Studies. He's a political scientist and is going to try to walk us through some of the complexities of this situation and talk about what people can do. So, Florence, I'd like to go to you first. You are in Lima, the capital of Peru. What have you been seeing? The international press is full of stories from Lima this morning. Please tell us what's going on. And if you do have some photographs that you can share with us, that would be fantastic.
Yes, hello. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this big issue here in my country. I actually started to document this back in Cusco, where I live, where the riots were really violent and led to 1 person assassinated who is a specific leader, a very beloved leader, and end up with even more violence against civilians. So I would like just to share with you some of my photos. Okay, so I'm gonna try like this. Can you see? Can you please confirm that you can see my share screen? Hello?
Yes, we can see it just fine. Thank you.
Great. So I've been documenting how the violence has escalated in my country in a way that for now we have more than 50 dead people, counting people in the south of the country. Most of them are indigenous Aymaras and Quechua. This is the mask that the leader Remo Candia Guevara used to wear before he was shot dead. Um, Remo, it's really important to say that Remo comes from a family that unionized in the 70s when the indigenous land were taken from them. And there was a kind of a feudal system installed in whole Peru. So Remo comes from that family, the first to create a huge riot to take back their lands. And he was shot on January 11th. And this is the people that reunited in Cusco, in La Plaza Tupac Amaru, to say goodbye to him. and yes, to give honors to his life. So we'll just show you some pictures. So what is going on in Peru has really many layers because killing this indigenous leader has many impacts in the whole society. So, for example, after this, the different regions in Cusco organized to come to Lima, and yesterday they had a huge riot going on in the center of Lima because they want to be heard. They want to stop violence. And all of these people reunited are indigenous peasants or campesinos, as we call it here. And yesterday, it was not different. Violence really escalated super fast, and police were shooting people directly. They were firing tear gas bombs directly to civilians. And as far as we know, there is two people with serious injuries from yesterday, and there was one building that got fire because of the use of the tear gas bombs. So this is what is going on right now in Cusco and in Lima. And this is the people that have come all the way from Cusco um, with their own cars to be heard in Lima.
Thank you. So maybe we can turn to you for a moment, Paulo. And what is behind this mobilization? What are people looking for? As I mentioned in the intro, 6 presidents, 2 coups, 1 impeachment, and 2 presidential resignations in 6 years. People must be very frustrated, but it's not clear from the outside really what are all the different forces at work. Can you try to help us to understand better?
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I'm happy to talk about these topics, and actually happy to hear also your thoughts about what I'm going to say. Talking about this crisis has two sides. One side is, what we can read in most of the international press about institutions, political actors, and as you say, like six presidents in 7 years, all these institutional crises that is contributing to a scenario of a chaotic scenario in terms of politics and policies. And there is another side of the story that is like this social story that is being observed, like in the mobilizations. Um, because of course these mobilizations started as a reaction of the removal of Pedro Castillo after he attempted attempted a self coup. However, the reasons behind are not only conjunctural, are not only rooted in this small crisis that we are observing right now, and it has a longer kind of explanation that has to do with the relationship of these groups, as Florence was trying to explain, with democracy in general and institutions in general. If we have to put like the history of Peru in perspective, in a historical perspective, it's one of the latest countries in Latin America in which universal vote was granted. Most of these communities, their parents, their grandparents were not able to vote because it was prohibited to vote for people who were not illiterate people, right? So that explains a little bit of like the kind of inequalities, political inequalities that we are observing. The universal vote was granted in 1979, right? That sounds for the perspective of today, it looks like a lot of time ago, but in a historical perspective, it's just yesterday. And at the moment that they were able to exert to use their political rights for the first time to vote for authorities, the shining path appeared. There was a lot of political violence, then authoritarianism. So the first opportunity that they have to actually use their voice in the polls was after the transition in 2001, and they have been doing that in elections However, the system has failed them because they elect presidents that campaign with promises in the left that align to what they're looking for in terms of agricultural policies, in terms of like indigenous rights and stuff like that. But at the same time, once in power, most of these presidents have betrayed their voters. And that kind of resentment has been growing on in the past years. And I think it is not just symbolic that a president like Castillo was elected and was seen for most of these people as like a real opportunity. Okay, this guy is not only campaigning with left wing agenda, but also seems like us, looks like it's a rural professor. He's part of an indigenous community, so maybe he will do something better than the other presidents that we have helped to enter into power and then have betrayed us. Uh, but at the same time, there was a lot of opposition from the elites, from right-wing parties that have made like the presidency of Castillo a little bit harder. It's also important to say that Castillo's presidency was not also like very good. He had a lot of problems. He has been accused of corruption, and so he was not necessarily the best president. But in the minds and hearts of these people, he was their president. And at the moment that he was impeached after attempting the self coup, the rage just spread in a lot of people, especially after observing how the police was starting to repress. So I think the kind of violence and rage and also like I don't know, like the kind of activities that we are observing, like the compromise of a lot of these people has to do with this kind of long story of betrayal, that they don't feel that the democracy is actually responding to their needs, that they are being betrayed by the people who they elect. And that is something that you're observing right now in the streets with these kind of big platforms and demands that they are pronouncing nowadays. So we have to go behind that. What's behind that? Those kind of like maximalist kind of claims that they are making is this feel of like this system is not working for us anymore, and so we have to change it, and that's why I think the idea of a constitutional assembly is so widespread in these groups.
So what we've been hearing in the international press is not so much that the mobilizations are demanding the reinstitution of Pedro Castillo, but they're demanding the resignation, as we understand it, of Dina Boluarte, who's the interim president, and to go to new elections. Is the Constituent Assembly also a fundamental demand of the mobilization? How are you seeing that? And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that as well, Florence. Is that are those really truly the demands of the mobilization, as they're the ones that I mentioned reflected in the international press? Is that correct, or is there more to it than what we're hearing?
Well, as my colleague is saying, there is so many layers to understand this crisis. Another layer, just before I answer your question, another layer is that there is a several drought right now going on in the south of Peru. So most of the campesinos and campesinas are left without food, without their crops. Their crops just died. And this happened from October to December. There was no rain at all. So people were starting to feel frustrated, hunger. They feel that they are in need of help, like urgently, because of, yes, climate change and many other issues going on right now in the world. And at this specific moment, the parliament decided to destitute Castillo. Castillo as the only campesino that could ever be president in Peru, and the first one, right? So they felt represented, and all of a sudden, they felt like nobody cares about their opinion, about their vote. What is this kind of democracy? So they feel, yes, even more than frustrated. No food. The land is completely polluted because of mining. So they were asking for a new constitution. They were asking for a new system that can help them not only to to stop their land to be polluted, but also to be helped so they can grow maize, so they can grow potatoes, and they can live a fair life. So there is many demands now that the people are just yelling in the streets, but nobody wants to hear them. They're also demanding a better education. They're demanding a better health system. So many things that I mean, out of Lima, just they don't have access. And if this means to have a new constitution and a new assembly, yes, these are the demands. This is what you're yelling. This is the reason that they have come from every corner in the country to Lima. Sadly, recent speech from Dina Boluarte, she's denying the demands of her own people, and this is just helping the political crisis to even increase.
So, why is it that those who are holding power are able to hold it in the face of so much popular discontent? What are the mechanisms that they use to um, implement repression? I'm sure, again, it's a complicated question, but uh, Paulo, can you talk to that point a little bit? And perhaps I can add to this. Are there factors in the international environment, for example, U.S. policy, which reinforce that oligarchy that's holding power now? Or I shouldn't
Well,
jump to that word, but yes, please go ahead.
sure, no. Just to first to complement what Flores was saying, the fact that a lot of people has to come to the capital and mobilize in the capital in order to be heard is basically part of this representation crisis that we are talking about. Not only that the country is so centralized that doesn't listen to the communities that are in different parts of the country, but that there is no political leader that can represent them through the institutions. There is no, there are lots of Congress people, even from the left wing, that have been repudiated by the protesters in the streets outside Lima. So the fact that we are observing this massive mobilization towards the capital, it's just like illustrating this representation crisis, this link that has been broken, and therefore it's really hard to see like a solution that comes from like the people who is currently in power. As Florence was saying, the president is not necessarily the most. She's denying the protests. She's trying to criminalize in her speeches what's going on in the streets, and in that sense, just trying to frame this as like a group of delinquents, violent people who is trying to destabilize the country. That's kind of like the rhetoric of the government. So how is it possible to see like the sustainability of this kind of government in this situation, especially when you see the polls? There is a lot of people who actually disapproves the current president. The thing is that we are observing an interesting and very worrying coalition of power right now, in which it's not only the president that is the problem, but that she has a very good relationship with the armed force and the police on the one hand, and on the other, that something that has been a problem for a lot of presidents in the past 5 years. She has a very good relationship, or at least like a good relationship with people in the opposition, people who opposed Castillo, but now is backing her in Congress, especially some right wing and radical right legislators in Congress who are actually demanding for more repression. There is people in Congress who actually think that that what we are observing now is not enough. That the government has to repress more in order to pacify the country. So that's kind of like the coalition that she has. And another kind of counterweight or balance to this kind of coalition will be the media. The problem is that most of mainstream media is actually also aligning to this kind of discourse. we're observing a lot of criminalization of protests. There is no there is not enough condemnation of repression from the police, and thinking in terms of like what can the international community can do. Something that has been very important in the past days is actually that there is a lot of information about these kind of crimes in the international media and not in the national media, and that kind of public shaming that some people, some of the cultural elites can exert on national media is important, because after media from the US and from Europe started to report how the police and the military were killing people in an illegal way, if there is a legal way to kill people anyways, uh, the national media, the local media started to react and finally report, like how and why these you can observe some sort of repression and indiscriminate and arbitrary repression from the police. So I think it is very important, for instance, the role that the international media is playing in highlighting the repression of the police and the military, and highlighting the stories, especially of people who has been killed. That was not part of the discussion in Peru until Reuters, for instance, make a portrait of one of the people who were killed in Ayacucho, who was actually helping one of the neighbors. This person was not even protesting. It's a person who saw an injured person in his door, opened the door in order to help this person, and was killed by the military. That kind of stories that are only appearing in the international media are very important to oppose the way how the government is handling this situation at the domestic level.
You have something to say?
If it wasn't for the work of Reuters, we wouldn't have this video. We wouldn't have an investigation going on, and this murder is just happening like this. Everyone saw it, and yes, we can't even talk about it because local press is not informing people. This is a great. I mean, this is outraging. Just yesterday, the home minister gave a speech saying, first of all, and also Dina Boluarte saying that they want to thank the military and the police forces for their labor. They said it. They describe it as a labor, right? Labor trying to fight vandalism. But why are they calling the riots, the protesters, as vandalism? This is not right. The home minister said that they didn't use extreme force, and the video where we can see the tank, the video you showed just 5 minutes ago, where we can see this tank going on, I mean, crossing the street, he said that was completely fake. So the home minister saying that they're not using extreme force like this one. This is what he said yesterday. And local media, especially media from Lima, from the capital, are supporting this kind of speeches. And this is really dangerous because it makes it separates us in two sides. So there is one side believing the home minister, which is completely normal. Why wouldn't we believe him, right? We need to believe our politicians somehow. And in another side, the campesinos, the campesinas, the indigenous people fighting for their lives, wanting to be heard, wanting a change, wanting to have same rights as people in the city. So we are completely split in two sides, and this is dangerous. This is making the Peruvians killing each other.
So, Pablo, you mentioned and Florence the current government to stay in power is relying on the police, the military, the media, and perhaps a segment. You mentioned, Paulo, that the polls had shown that there was. You didn't say the number, but a lot of disapproval of the president. What do those numbers look like? Is there any hope to split the ruling coalition? Is that a path forward, or what are we seeing as the likely outcome right now? Is there and what and should the international community be trying to focus our message on? Because it's been very difficult for us to understand what exactly we should say about this, and we'd like to campaign on it more strongly. So help us to, what's the message that we need to project?
The last poll published both by IEP, the institution where I belong, but also Ipsos Apoyo, both polls show around 70% of disapproval to the government. That's it's the president that assumes power with the lowest um, with the lowest approval in recent history. However, I think that's public opinion. That's a poll that you make. It's in a country like Peru, with a lot of distrust in politics, with a lot of distrust to institutions. That kind of disapproval doesn't necessarily can be seen like in the streets as mobilizations. In other countries, that 70% of disapproval could be observing strong mobilizations outside of a specific parts of the country. Like a more like national mobilization. However, here it's just like the groups that feel this as a very urgent issue, as Florence was saying, in terms of the drought, in terms of also like the problem with a lot of problems related to agriculture and their way of living. Those people are the ones that are protesting nowadays. But so in that sense, what I think there is a there is a limit for what people can do in the streets, especially now that we are observing that the government is not gonna change its orientation towards the protests. The press is not gonna criticize it more than what they have been doing, and especially after yesterday's mobilization in Lima, in which there was actually a lot of violence in the streets between police officers and some of the protesters, and that actually finally ended up in an accident in which like a building was set on fire. That has created also a new opportunity for this kind of rhetoric of criminalization of the protest to take advantage and to advance. So I think there is a limit effect of what the streets can do in this kind of in the short term. I don't think that this is going to be solved easily, in a couple of days, like as what happened a couple of years ago when another president was forced to resign after a lot of protests. And there is no political solution in terms of like the Congress, because as Florence was saying, Peru is not only like in this kind of crisis of representation, but there is a lot of polarization in the political elite. And in that sense, there is a lot. These people that are aligning with the president right now, which are like the majority in Congress, they're not gonna criticize her, because they think that doing that will actually play in favor of the other side that they seem problematic. So I think that in terms of political actors, you need a different kind of incentive, or a different kind of pressure, which can actually come from the international arena. As I was saying, like the role of the press, the role of human rights organization pressing to their governments to make statements, the embassies in the country making statements, they are actually they can actually contribute to change this kind of balance in favor of the government. Not necessarily because one actually wants the government to resign, but the problem is that beyond the crisis, there is a very responsible behavior from the government in terms of how they are handling the situation that has cost over than 50 lives of people, and that's actually over the average of other governments. Like before this government, the highest number of deaths in protest that another president had is Alan Garcia, in whose government had like 80 people who were killed during different types of protests in 5 years. in a month we are seeing, we are observing like a number of deaths that are not, that are like creating this kind of rage. And I think that's something that has to be questioned, and it's not being questioned enough by national media, by national actors who are actually more concerned about like infrastructure damage, like private property, how this building was set on fire yesterday, rather than asking why there is 50 people that has been killed. Among these people there are like I think 6 kids that have been minors that have been killed. There is a lot of people who were helping. There is one doctor that was helping like people in the streets that were injured, that was also killed by the police repression. So I think that's something that is not being discussed enough in national media. And the fact that you observe these stories being portrayed in the international media or by international human rights organization actually creates and has an influence on the country. And I think in this kind of situation, that kind of influence is very important, because at the domestic level, things are very tight, as Florence was trying to explain. It's really hard to observe that politicians are going to sit and are going to actually want to create a space of dialogue and like vote for a referendum to call for a constitutional assembly or something like that. They are actually delaying right now the most simple thing that they can do, that is to call for new elections, which is one of the most important claims of the people right now. But it's a decision that has not been made yet. There is an advance. There has been a first voting in Congress, but this kind of decision is still being is not certain when we're going to have these new elections. So I think uh, creating a lot of creating important international pressure on these actors can be very helpful. And for once to actually, the first thing that we need to ask for is the stop of repression, because that's not contributing to anything, rather than to escalate the conflict, to radicalize the demands of the people, and obviously creating problems in terms of like the lives that are being taken in the streets.
Thank you so much. In terms of stopping the repression and giving more force to that message, I'm curious what other activities you think the international community might be able to conduct. As you know, Global Exchange and Peninsula 360 Press have been sending people to try to cover the story, to try and understand it ourselves. I understand, Florence, that you are making a trip to the United States. Are you going to be talking to people about the situation, and is there, and this I guess is my big question, room or the necessity for the international community to send representatives to Peru? Would that be useful? Would that be possible at this time to make a mission of observation?
Of course, this is really important right now. For example, as I was talking about Remo Candia Guevara, this indigenous leader that was murdered in Cusco. Well, I was recently interviewing the family after a week of his murder, and they are being persecuted and intimidated by police until now. And they haven't got the opportunity to talk with any person representative of human rights, of the International Court of Human Rights, right? And what they're looking for is to be recognized as victims, and they need help because they're, as I said, they're being persecuted by police. The thing is that when Remo Candia Guevara was killed, the first thing that the local media said is that he's a terrorist. And this is the way they're criminalizing everyone that has an opinion against the actual government of Dina Boluarte, right? This is really dangerous because when we talk about terrorism, there is a different meaning in Peru about terrorism. Any person that has an opinion and that reunites another group of person can be yes, can be judged as a terrorist, you know. And now, for example, happening in Ayacucho, after 10 people died in Ayacucho, which is another part of the south of the country, um, at least two indigenous leaders or campesinas leaders were taken by the police without being able to have a lawyer or anything, just because they're also raising their voices. So this looks like yes, this is a very military government. This doesn't look like a democracy, and it's getting even more dangerous for any civilian right now. If Dina Boluarte continues, if she continues to saying that these people that are protesting are terrorists, I don't think that a dialogue will be possible. If the military and the police keep killing their leaders, I don't think they in the future they will be able to talk with the crowd, because the crowd is upset, and it is impossible to set a dialogue with a very upset group of people that doesn't feel represented of heard, and the legal I mean the military forces. It is impossible. So at this point, I don't think our politicians have a plan. I think they're just acting out of racism, out of um, how can I say that in English? I don't find the word, but they're just too proud of themselves. They want to keep the power. They don't care about the people. They don't care about the opinion. They don't care about democracy. And yes, things are just, I don't know. I see that this year is not going to be an easy year for Peru, but because people are not going to be content. Dina Boluarte is not going to give up the power, and the all the people that just came to Lima yesterday, they will be forced to go back to their departments, to their places, because these people work the land. They cannot just leave their crops and come and stay in Lima more days. So I think that the big riots are going to stop, but the country will be fractured, divided, and people will be sad until another riot just comes up and even more my violence installs in Peru. So I don't see dialogue in the next months in this year.
I mean, historically speaking, this kind of situation where legitimate dissent is repressed all over Latin America and around the world, it leads to the possibility of armed rebellion. Do you see that as a potential consequence of what is happening now? I mean, certainly we don't want to see that. Peru has had such a history with that. But what else can people do if their demands and their petitions are rejected?
Well, it's really complicated to answer this, but it is important to know that all these people that are protesting, they have nothing to do with Sendero Luminoso. They are
Yeah,
not people that are armed. They're not seeking for the power. They just want to have the same rights as any other person in the city. As I said, they don't have access to education. They don't have access to healthcare, or just they the hospitals outside of Lima have no the hasn't not the infrastructure to take care of yes, of diseases and any other issue. Plus the lack of rain, and I mean everything in this country is going really bad. They have been overusing our resources, to make these nice contracts with mining, and with any other activity that is extractive. But the country and the people, yes, everything has an end, and people are just, it's their limit. They have reached their limit.
yeah. Paulo, can you speak to that same question of where do we go from here? And if you want to come back and tell us more about the extractivist industries, and if there's anything that we should know more about that, please feel free to touch on that point.
Well, to start with, I cannot hardly emphasize. I cannot emphasize enough that the people that we are seeing protesting in the streets currently, they themselves, their parents, their grandparents, their brothers were killed by Sendero Luminoso.
Yeah.
Right? Like they are these are the people who suffer most from political violence in the 80s and 90s. And so linking these people to the shining path, as the government and some media is trying to do, is outrageous. And also, most of these people actually participated and fighted against the shining path and were killed because of that. Like their parents, their older brothers and sisters, because indigenous and campesinos were a key force against the shining path in the 80s and the 90s. So that kind of link that the government and some media is trying to connect between like the shining path and these people who is protesting is again, as I said, is kind of outrageous and is not precise in terms of history. So in that sense, I think the people who is protesting now are radicalizing and everything, but they will do it through protests in the streets. I don't think that it is possible to see all these people getting arms, like and trying to fight the state in a civil war or something like that, because I think they are very aware of like what that means in terms of like violence, repression, killings, and stuff like that. And as we are seeing, right, like the radicalization of their protests only goes in the ways of manifestations. The Shining Path, any terrorist group, don't do that. They don't call for elections, for instance. They try to seize power and that's it. These people are calling for elections, are calling for a constitutional assembly, very institutional demands, right? Like they're actually trying to solve the problem through institutions. They're not asking for they're not asking for a coup. They're not asking for a revolution. They're asking for institutional solutions to this problem of representation. So I don't think that can happen. However, there is obviously a problem because in Peru there are illegal sectors that are trying to take advantage of protests in some parts. We cannot hide that, right? Like there are illegal groups that like illegal mining groups in some parts of the country. There is drug trafficking, right? Like and obviously some of these groups can try to take advantage of the situation and start like some sort of contribute to chaos, but one would think that like a military will be intelligent enough to separate things and like answer to different kind of challenges in different ways. However, as I think we have been emphasizing in the past 30 minutes, the problem is that the government is not willing to do that. Is actually trying to pack everything as a single problem. Is trying to say like the problem that we are observing today is caused by the Shining Path, who is like somehow returned and is organizing all these people and is creating like chaos.
Oh, that's
So,
what they're saying.
of
Wow.
course, that's
No.
part of
Everything. Okay.
the justification of one of the state of emergencies in parts of the country. Literally states that it's because they're like the police has observed the involvement of the Shining Path, right? And that's actually as Florence was describing, something that we call terruqueo, right? Like the act of framing any protest, any criticism to the country, to the government, as terrorism, as part of the Shining Path. So rather than seeing like the problem of like an armed struggle or something like that, the fear that I observe as analyzing all these things and seeing like the past the past history is actually authoritarianism. I think that the most pressing problem right now in Peru is not coming from the protesters. It's coming from a government that is increasingly becoming more and more authoritarian. It's using the police as like their social I don't know, like base or something like that, in order to confront and pacify the country. So I think people in some local media, domestic media, are actually saying that we are like mirroring what happened in the 80s with the Shining Path. I don't think that's the case. I think if we are closer to something, is closer to 1990 and Fujimori and something like that. A government that has a civic figure, but it's backed by the military, controls institutions and so and stuff like that. Obviously, right now the president Boluarte, she doesn't control all the institutions. She doesn't have control of the Congress. There is actually a very convenient alliance right now going on between these groups. But I think if there is no pressure from the international arena and from domestic arena, the incentives for the government to actually become more and more authoritarian and even deny the possibility of new elections is increasing with what we are observing right now. So that I think that's something that we should emphasize and we should be ready to talk about is the fact that we are observing actually a transition towards an authoritarian rule at some point
Exactly.
as the most pressing problem rather than like subversion or something like that.
Yes.
So,
Government.
yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, that's exactly. Hello. You hear
Yeah,
me?
we didn't hear you for a second. Just repeat.
Say like the government is not showing that they want dialogue. They don't want dialogue because they are just criminalizing the protesters and the campesinos as terrorists, and they are or killing the leaders or putting them in jail right now. So they don't want dialogue, and yeah, things are going to get even closer to a military government. Yes.
So I want to thank you both. We only have a few minutes left here, and I have learned so much, as I'm sure that our listeners have as well. And if I could just, try to repeat what I'm hearing from you is that we should be positioning ourselves in the international community to say, stop the repression, stop the criminalization of protest, humanitarian and food relief to the south of Peru. That should be the actionable priority, and that there should be new elections and dialogue. And uh, are those the right demands? Are those the things we should be focusing on? Okay.
Yes, we haven't talked much about the reason they need a new constitution. The last one was made under the government of Fujimori, who was a dictator, and there are many things that this constitution are obliging. I mean, there is no previous consult for indigenous people when an enterprise wants to extract a mineral or work on petrol. I don't know how to explain it. But yes,
That
indigenous
makes
need a new constitution. And they're asking for new laws that protect them and give them back their rights.
okay. So the new constitution that protects rights and the uh,
This
and
this
puts
is the
limits on extractivist industries. Yeah. Okay.
yes. Just I mean, no, not to end this extractivism, but because Peru is a mining country, but laws that can protect people.
Hmm.
Yeah, just thinking like in terms of like what the international community has to do. I think as you were saying, like the issue of repression, the issue of the criminalization of protest, and the respect of human lives, human and civic rights, it's very important. I think the rest is actually part of a domestic discussion in terms of like what should be addressed. And I agree that in the situation that we are currently, um, I think the need for a constitutional assembly is kind of is increasing day by day. However, I think it's very important that the international community focuses a lot more in what is currently creating more problems for the people, that is repression. And I cannot emphasize this enough. what we are seeing right now, it's not normal. Not even in a country that has had a lot of repression for protests in the past 10 years. Even after Fujimori, we have had a lot of repression and a lot of criminalization of protests. But what we are observing today, it's crossing the line, and again, is taking the country into a very authoritarian and problematic direction. So I think in terms of like what has to be prioritized right now, what we need right now in terms of of international pressure, it's basically related to the end, to the stop of repression, and to the guarantee that rights are going to be protected and respected by the government.
And if that can happen, then the Peruvians can work out the rest of it. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Hopefully.
Or you hopefully that will be your job. Yeah.
And I think it's also important not only to, obviously, human rights organizations are very wide, but especially to indigenous organizations, because the people who is being killed right now, its target is part from specific groups of society that are indigenous, are campesinos, Quechuas, Aymaras that are being killed. Uh, and this is a racial pattern that we also observe during the years of political violence, that repression is always going against people who is racialized and part of indigenous communities. I think that's something that has to be highlighted. Um, there are organizations that are also involved in this kind of issues. I think that's important because also the behavior of the police is relying on institutional racism. The repression that we are observing is different in the city of Lima, is different against protesters in the richest districts of Lima than what we are observing in Puno, in Cusco, in Ayacucho, in the southern departments of Peru, and against especially indigenous peoples who are seen as, like with a lot of stereotypes, with a lot of disrespectful racial stereotypes. So I think that's also something that we haven't emphasized enough. I think Florence did a better job than I did talking in terms of indigenous peoples and racism, but that's very important. There is a racial dimension in what is going on currently, and again, I think 100% of the people who is killed are in some way related to indigenous groups, are racialized. That's not for chance. That's not just an accident.
There is a current investigation about where people got shot during the protests, especially in Juliaca, where 29 people were shot dead. And you can see it in local media, but independent media actually. For example, Ojo Público, which is, as I said, a independent media, and Salud con Lupa, that maybe we can share it in the comments after the video. So you can see where the military and the police were shooting people exactly. So there is many people with bullets directly in their heads, other in the chest, and less people with bullets in their legs. But specifically, there is a lot of people that have died because they received a bullet here and here. And so yes, and this is a current investigation, and maybe I can share you with the link with you so you can see it.
Yes, please. If you can put that in the chat or afterwards when this goes up onto YouTube and Facebook and onto the Global Exchange site. And I want to thank both of you from the bottom of my heart. I would really like to be in touch with you after this conversation so that we can find out if there's more plans that we could make to be more visible and helpful in this situation. To the Global Exchange audience, thanks for joining us today. Peninsula 360 and Global Exchange will be bringing you more information and from Peru and from around the hemisphere in the days to come. Stay with us. And again, Florence, Phil and Paulo Sosa, thank you so much for your time and for the truly important information that you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and it's been a pleasure to talk with both of you.
We couldn't hear Florence there at the end. Can we unmute?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was just thanking you so much for giving us the space and giving us for your time so we can explain what's going on in Peru. It is really important that international media knows more about this, and so you can spread the word and help us.
Okay. Thank you so very much, and we'll be counting on talking to you and figuring out what more we can do in these days. Thank you so much again, and thanks to the audience. Goodbye for now.